Welcome to Case by Case. We want to just take a moment and remind you that this content is intended for adult audiences. It is created for educational and informational purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised, as discussions may include references to real criminal cases, violence, and other sensitive and potentially distressing topics. While we strive to present every case with accuracy and respect those involved, the material may not be suitable for all viewers. Please proceed thoughtfully. And remember, if you need to take a step back, if you find something that concerns you, if you find it to be triggering and you need to take a step back, please do. You can join us whenever you're ready to come back. We'll leave the light on. Welcome back to Case by Case. I'm Terry. Today's episode is disturbing on a couple of levels, not just because a teenager disappears in the middle of the day, but because of the years of uncertainty that follow, the usual details that would be normal in one home, you'll find very unusual inside this home, and the way the investigation changes course long after the fact. Let's talk about the person who was missing in this case, Alissa Turney. Alissa Turney was 17 when she disappeared on May 17th, 2001. That was the last day of her junior year in Phoenix, Arizona. She left school around midday and was never seen again. The last person to report seeing her was Michael Turney. He wasn't her biological father, but he did raise her. So for clarity today, I'll refer to him as her father. In fact, I think he actually adopted her when she was much younger. And then when she was 9, her mother passed away from some type of illness. I believe it might have been cancer, but I'm not 100% on that. And he continued to raise her along with his other daughter, the younger Sarah Turney, which you'll hear about as well in this. Early on, a note inside the house said that Alissa had gone to California, and the case was classified as Alissa being a runaway. That label really shaped the early response, so there wasn't an investigation per se. Years passed, but Alissa's younger sister, Sarah, really began looking at the story with fresh eyes as she got older because she kept thinking, this doesn't fit. She just would not have left me. You see, Alissa and Sarah were really close. And Alissa, although she was the older sister, she really looked out for her younger sister, Sarah. So today I'm going to walk you through the high points, what we know, what's disputed, the investigational pivot in 2008, the 2020 indictment, and the 2023 bench acquittal, and what's still missing. And then I'm going to point you to Sarah Turney's podcast, Voices for Justice, because no one has done more to keep this case in the light, and no one knows this case and the situation surrounding it better than her sister, Sarah. So let's talk about who is Alissa. Alissa lived in Phoenix with her father, Michael, and her younger half-sister, Sarah. Now, I found some information that said that Michael adopted both both Alissa and her brother. But the brother was older, so he was already out of the house. And I believe he was he had his own family and stuff. Michael married Alissa's mother when Alissa was young, and after the mother passed away, he continued to raise the children. From here forward, I'm going to be very careful about the difference between documented facts and reported accounts. Documented facts are things like official dates, warrants, charges, court rulings, and what the police say they actually found. Reported accounts are still important, but they're not official documentation. They're things like family members, friends, former classmates, things that are said in interviews and what journalists and podcasters have compiled from those interviews. So even though some of the information comes from Sarah, who lived in that home, we still don't count that as official, documented in the sense of official documentation, if that makes any sense. So you'll hear me differentiate these because I want to make sure it's clear on what we know and what we're pretty sure we know, okay? So the day she disappeared, it's May 17th, 2001. It's her last day of junior year. Michael says he picked Alissa up around lunchtime after dropping her off that morning. There was an argument. He says there was an argument. And the detail appears different in multiple retellings of this situation. But by late afternoon and evening, Alissa does not return as expected. Inside the home, there's a note that says she went to California. Based on that, Alissa is reported as a runaway and not immediately treated as a typical missing person case, even though she's only 17. That matters because the level of urgency and the early investigative posture can be very different when authorities believe a teenager left on their own. And, even though she is only 17, the police treat that differently because she had the ability and the age to leave on her own. She could have found her way. But, if you're talking about a 10-year-old or 6-year-old, I believe they would have treated it much differently because they're not likely to just run away and it be dismissed. Family members, though, were uneasy. Alissa left behind belongings. She left behind money from her job. She didn't even get her last paycheck, the way I understand it. And there was no common sense path in California that made sense to anyone. She didn't reconnect with relatives there. So if she'd gone to California, why wouldn't she have reached out to people there? She had an aunt in California who said she didn't hear from her, and she believes if she'd gone to California, that's where she would have gone. So the runaway narrative still stayed with investigators, but it didn't make sense to family. So family were, kind of skeptical from day one. Now, Sarah, the younger sister, the idea that Alissa would vanish without a word did not fit what Sarah felt because they had a very close relationship. Alissa looked out for Sarah, and over time, Sarah started asking questions like, why a California note? Where are the home surveillance tapes that she had heard all about from Alissa? Did the California payphone call really happen a week later? And if so, is there a recording? Because Michael claimed that she left a voicemail on the home phone, but that he erased it. So there was really no way to confirm that. And when the answers didn't add up, Sarah shifted to advocacy because she said, I've really been thinking there's something wrong here. And even though that was her father, she requested records, she built a timeline, and she kept up contact with detectives. She eventually launched her Voices for Justice podcast so that the case couldn't just fade away. Visibility isn't proof, but it absolutely keeps pressure on a cold story. So we need to talk about some details here. And this part needs precision. What's documented? Authorities found surveillance equipment inside the home, and Michael acknowledged he had installed it. Police also described recorded phone calls in the household. These points are reflected in the mainstream reporting and the law enforcement interviews. Now, what's reported? Some coverage, again, mainstream outlets summarizing the police footage and interviews. They describe a camera concealed in a hallway vent, suggesting monitoring beyond just regular external security cameras. Having a concealed camera in a hallway vent would really unnerve me. I cannot imagine my father, who was very protective of me, but he, didn't have his thumb on me all the time, especially at 17. As hard as it was for him, he did allow me to have some freedom. And I cannot imagine a camera in a hallway vent, secretly recording people in the family. That to me is abnormal behavior. I'd love to know what the rest of you think, and you can comment in the discussion group. But I just think that's really abnormal behavior for any parent to be doing, unless, you suspect your child is going to be committing some major crime and you have no other choice. Or if you suspect your child is harming another person in the home. But I didn't see anything said of that. We don't really know exactly why that was put in there. And I'm not going to state that there was a camera inside Alyssa's bedroom because public documentation just isn't that specific. So we'll keep that out of the documented column. It may have happened, it may not, but we know that there was allegedly a camera concealed in a hallway vent, and that's just, to me, unusual. But the police and national coverage do confirm indoor surveillance equipment did exist, and there were recorded calls as part of the home environment. There is proof that there was a camera hidden in the hallway vent, and that's really as far as we can go for what was really in the home as surveillance. Another theme that you'll hear about in interviews, and this is reported, not a court finding, is that Michael treated Alissa differently from Sarah. He was more strict with her, and at times he appeared to be more like a jealous boyfriend. He was highly controlling of her movements, her friends, and her social life. He really kept his thumb on her. It comes from interviews from Sarah, Alyssa's friends, and Alyssa's boyfriend at the time, and journalist summaries in mainstream coverage. For example, ABC's 2020 and Good Morning America segments, and write-ups from outlets like People and Oxygen, as well as Sarah's podcast. These are accounts that paint a picture of tight control, differential treatment, but there aren't any court findings for this. So again, these are all alleged. The safest way I can say this is according to the interviews summarized by mainstream media outlets and Sarah Turney's podcast. Michael enforced unusually strict rules with Alissa, and at times he behaved in ways that witnesses compared to a jealous boyfriend. But these are not judicial findings. And I just want us to be careful about this because Michael was, his case was dismissed related to this in a court of law. Now, in 2006, a Florida inmate named Thomas Heimer falsely confessed to killing Alissa. Detectives determined that the confession did not hold up, but it pulled the file back into focus, and Phoenix detectives Stuart Summershoe and William Anderson, I believe, took a fresh look and flagged the multiple red flags, the runaway note versus the lack of money or the phone trail. I mean, you're going to run away from Phoenix to somewhere in California and you don't have any money, you left it all behind. And I'm sure if her dad was looking at all of her behaviors and checking everything, she probably didn't have a way to squirrel away enough money to get her where she needed to go. But there's no phone trail, there's no anything. So this led to a broader concern that this might not be a simple voluntary walk off or runaway. So they moved to get a search warrant, and boy, what they found from that search warrant was beyond their expectations. In December of 2008, they served a search warrant at Michael Turney's home, and they were looking for home surveillance tapes that might show Alissa leaving or not, the original runaway note that he said existed, and any recording of the California payphone call Michael said he received about a week after Alissa vanished. But what they found was something completely different, and it sent them down a very serious road. They found 26 pipe bombs, a number of firearms, and they found written materials, including a document that was referred to in the media as the Diary of a Madman Martyr. Reporting at the time described a man targeting a local union hall. Now, this is separate from Alyssa's disappearance, but it became an immediate public safety emergency. Federal authorities jumped in, and in 2010, Michael Turney pled guilty to unlawful possession of 26 unregistered destructive devices. He received a 10-year federal sentence. I can't even imagine what may have happened had this case not gone before detectives and they got that search warrant. I mean, with that many explosive devices and indications in some of his documents that he was going to do multiple assaults, that could have been a mass event of unbelievable proportions. Now, a couple of things here. The explosive case was grave and very real, and the authorities took notice in that, and the feds got involved, and he went away for that. But it was not proof of what happened to Alissa in 2001. So although we know that he's capable of damage, he's capable of killing, he's capable of all these things that he wrote about, it does not say that he committed any crime related to Alissa. So, you know, Michael has long said the California payphone call came in about a week after she disappeared and that he recognized the voice as Alissa. There's no answering service, answering machine. You know, remember in the day when you had home phones and you had an answering machine and people had to leave messages on the answering machine? You came in and you pressed a button or you called from some location and you said, play me all the messages. And then when you got finished, there was a button where you could erase everything because it was held on a physical tape there in the recording machine. If you don't recall those things existing, that's how they worked. You may hear references to phone records indicating a payphone in the Riverside area, but there is no independent verification that it was Alissa on the line. So we got to keep this in the disputed bucket for now. If you believe the call happened as described, that supports the idea that Alissa was alive a week later and had gone to California. But if you don't subscribe to that, then both the note and the call look like early misdirection that costs the investigation time. And, you know, in these cases where a person disappears under suspicious circumstances, time is so critical. But either way, there is no confirmed crime scene and no recovery of remains. But work continued for years after the 2008 search and after he went to jail on the weapons charges. On August 19th, 2020, the Maricopa County Grand Jury indicted Michael Turney on second-degree murder in Alissa's presumed death. This was nearly 2 decades after she vanished. For many people, this felt like the first formal test of a theory that had been discussed and budding for years. But an indictment is a charging document. It is not a conviction. It's the very beginning of going to trial, of being arrested. So the burden of proof is still entirely on the state. In 2023, July 2023, the case went to trial. During the state's presentation, the court during the time that the state was presenting evidence, the court granted a Rule 20 motion. That is a bench acquittal under Arizona procedure, under trial procedure, that says basically there is not enough evidence here to allow the case to continue to jury verdict. It means that it's legally insufficient. So in cases where a case goes to trial, there's a point where the judge has to look at the facts and say, you know what? This doesn't even meet what a reasonable person could find if presented before them. You know, for example, if someone goes and accuses you of stealing a hardware store, stealing something at a hardware store, but there's no real evidence that they can find, they can't find you on video, they can't find the missing items from the hardware store at your home. There's no one that puts you at the hardware store at that time. then even if the grand jury says, yeah, take them to court, the judge will often intervene and say, you know what? No reasonable jury could come to a conviction with only this information. It doesn't rise to the level, and a reasonable jury is always the standard that the judge will use in Arizona, everywhere, throughout the nation. It's the reasonable standard. What would a reasonable person sitting on a jury be likely to find beyond reasonable doubt? Remember, that's always the standard in criminal cases. So you've got to say that basically no other evidence could have happened that caused this missing person case, and we just don't have enough of that. So the judge did what most judges would have done. Now let's talk about what's documented versus what's disputed. Alissa left midday on 2007, 2001 and disappeared. That's fact. A note said she went to California. The case was initially labeled runaway. Those are facts. In December 2008, police served a police warrant following up on this case. They were looking for surveillance tapes, the note, and any call recording, but instead they found planning of a mass event. That led to a separate federal case. And in 2010, he pled guilty federally to that case, and he received a 10-year sentence. In 2020, a grand jury indicted him for second-degree murder. It went into trial, and in 2023, the court granted a Rule 20 and acquitted him. Now, the origin and meaning of the runaway to California note has always been disputed. The alleged California payphone call, there's no audio, no independent verification that it was Alissa. That's disputed. The extent and nature of control inside the home, reports whether he was really stripped or not, there's no independent proof of that. That's been disputed. These comparisons come from interviews summarized in mainstream media coverage and in Voices for Justice. They are reported accounts, not court findings. And we know we can't always believe on mainstream media. That's why there's such a popularity of things like YouTube channels, because sometimes when they're telling a missing person case, they don't necessarily have all of the facts, or they might spin a narrative to make it a little more compelling for television. So, and I'm not accusing them of doing that. I'm saying that that can happen, and it has happened. So we just really don't know about just how tight of a control he had over Alissa. We also don't know whether there was any surveillance specifically included in a bedroom camera. That has been spoken about. It's very likely that Alissa told Sarah. Maybe Alissa spoke to other family members. But, Alissa had a brother. So I'm not quite sure where all of this has led. But what matters today is, where is Alissa? Is she alive somewhere and just could not stand that atmosphere anymore and left? Did a friend of hers help her leave, give her money, and has protected her all these years? What lead is the strongest today? What can we believe? If we believe that the situation in that home was that bad, it's not far-fetched to believe she might have left. And she might have said, as hard as it is for me to cut ties with Sarah and my other family members, I got to do it because I've got to do it. We don't know that she wasn't being mistreated in some form or fashion in that home and that it was hidden. Who saw or heard something small back then at school, along the route? Who did she talk to in that first week? Is there anything that was maybe small enough that someone felt like they couldn't report it, but it should be reported and they should come forward now? If you know something, even a small thing, please share it. Please share verified tips with law enforcement. You can also reach out to Sarah Turney. She's been very active on social media, and I'm sure that she would love to solve this for her sister. And I'm sure that if her sister is alive, she would love to get back in contact with her. And Sarah, if you're out there, we're rooting for you to find Alissa and to find the truth. You've done an amazing job of keeping her voice alive. And Alissa, if you're out there listening, we would love for you to reach out. You can reach out to us at casebycase10@gmail.com or reach out to your sister. If you reach out to us in confidence, you can tell us what we can report and what we can't report. Amy is always very, very strict about what we report, whose name we report, and we keep confidential sources truly confidential. But we'd love to know if you're out there. In closing, this case asks us to be careful. Careful with facts, careful with families, careful with our conclusions. And we can hold two truths at once. It is very possible that Alissa was being mistreated, controlled in that home that led to her disappearance, either on her own or in a criminal matter in 2001. But we also can hold the truth that this has not been solved and that Sarah and her family members need answers. I appreciate you being with us today. The truth always deserves a second look. Keep your discussions respectful, avoid doxing or harassment, and please send tips to the numbers I shared. We'll see you next time.